People today often think of ancient Egypt as the land of pyramids, golden treasures, and mysterious gods. They imagine pharaohs as majestic rulers who built wonders that still stand thousands of years later. The story we are told in schools and movies is one of beauty, greatness, and divine order. But behind that image, there is another truth. It is a truth of pain, fear, and punishment so cruel that even today they make us shiver. If you clicked on this video because you wanted to see the darker side of Egypt, you came to the right place. What you are about to hear will change the way you look at this famous civilization forever. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh was not just a king, but a living god. That belief gave him complete control over life and death. To disobey the pharaoh or the laws of the land was not only breaking the rules of men, it was seen as breaking the rules of the divine. And for such crimes, punishment had to be more than harsh. It had to terrify the soul. Justice in Egypt was not meant to be fair. It was meant to remind everyone that power flowed from the throne and that mercy was a gift given rarely, if at all. Courtrooms were not quiet places of reason. Trials were often quick, and the sentence was more important than the truth. Many punishments were carried out in public, designed to leave the crowd in shock. The goal was to turn punishment into theater. Imagine standing in a crowd of villagers, the hot desert sun burning above, while soldiers drag out the accused. The executioner does not hide his work. Instead, he shows every detail so that no one will forget what happens to those who dare to challenge the order of Egypt. One of the most horrific punishments was impalement. The victim would be lifted and placed on a sharp wooden stake. The stake would pierce the body slowly, often entering from below and exiting from the chest or shoulders. Death did not come quickly. It could take hours, even days, as the body slid further down. Crowds would gather to watch, and the screams would echo across the sand. The message was clear: betray your king, and your end will be as slow and painful as possible. Another nightmare was being fed to crocodiles. In Egypt, the Nile was more than a river. It was life itself, filled with creatures both sacred and deadly. Crocodiles were feared and worshipped at the same time. To be thrown to them was not only a physical death, it was a spiritual one. The Egyptians believed that if your body was torn apart and eaten, your soul could not find peace in the afterlife. Imagine the terror of being dragged to the water, tied up, and hearing the splash as the beasts drew near. For those accused of insulting the gods or defiling temples, this fate awaited them. It was both execution and eternal curse. Not all punishments ended with death. Some were designed to leave a person alive but ruined for the rest of their days. These punishments carried a different kind of cruelty, one that lingered long after the sentence was over. For thieves, the common penalty was the loss of a hand. Imagine standing before your community as a soldier raised a blade, knowing your life would never be the same again. Without a hand, you could not work, fight, or even feed yourself easily. The shame marked you as a criminal forever, and in a society that valued order above all else, that shame was its own kind of death. For liars and those accused of spreading false words, the punishment could be the cutting out of the tongue. The Egyptians believed words held power, even magical power. Lies were not just social wrongs. They were attacks on harmony, which they called ma'at. By removing the tongue, the authorities removed not only the crime, but also the possibility of it ever being repeated. Imagine never being able to speak again, your voice silenced for the rest of your life. To the Egyptians, it was poetic justice, but to the victim, it was a sentence worse than silence. It was exile from human connection. Mutilation also served as a public reminder of order. Every scar, every missing limb was a living warning. These punishments told the people that the law was always watching. They showed that even if you escaped death, you could not escape the weight of the pharaoh's justice. In a world where survival depended on family, trade, and reputation, such wounds destroyed more than the body. They destroyed a person's place in society. But why did the Egyptians embrace such cruelty? The answer lies in how they saw the pharaoh. He was not only ruler, but the living image of the gods on earth. To break the law was to insult the divine order of the universe. Punishment was not just correction, it was restoration of balance. The Egyptians believed the world was held together by Ma'at, truth, justice, and cosmic harmony. When someone stole, lied, or rebelled, they tore a hole in that order. And the punishment had to be as extreme as the crime, to sew the universe back together. This belief gave punishments a ritual power. They were not only for the living crowd, they were offerings to the gods, signs that Egypt remained faithful to divine law. Every hand cut, every tongue removed, every body impaled on a stake was a proof that the pharaoh ruled with the authority of heaven itself. The cruelty was not random. It was carefully designed to remind everyone that life and afterlife both depended on obedience to the crown. And yet, for the ordinary people, it was fear that ruled their daily lives. Imagine waking every morning knowing that one mistake could cost you your body, your voice, or your very soul. The pyramids might rise in glory, but beneath their shadow lay a world of fear where cruelty was as eternal as stone. Some of the punishments in Egypt were not only physical, but also deeply psychological. The fear of the afterlife played a huge role in how punishments were designed. The Egyptians believed that life on earth was only a step toward eternity. A good afterlife was everything, and to lose it was the greatest terror. This fear was used as a weapon. Authorities designed punishments that destroyed not only the body, but also the soul's chances of peace. To them, it was the ultimate form of control. One example was burning. For most people, being burned alive was a horrible way to die, but in Egypt it carried an even darker meaning. The body was sacred, and preserving it through mummification was the only way to ensure the soul's journey into the afterlife. To burn a body was to erase it from existence. Imagine standing in a crowd as flames swallowed someone whole, knowing that their soul would wander forever, denied of eternal rest. It was not just death. It was eternal punishment. Another feared penalty was drowning. Victims were sometimes bound and thrown into the Nile, the river that gave Egypt its life. On the surface, drowning might seem simple compared to impalement or mutilation, but to the Egyptians, it carried spiritual weight. The Nile was sacred, linked to gods and creation and myths. To die in its waters while tied and helpless was seen as being rejected by the very source of life. The people watching would not only see a criminal die, but also see the river itself claim them as unworthy. For soldiers who deserted in battle or betrayed their comrades, punishments could be uniquely brutal. Historical accounts speak of soldiers being beaten until their bones broke, then left to die in the desert sun, their bodies exposed to vultures. This was a double insult. Not only did they suffer a painful death, but their corpses were denied the proper burial rites. Without burial, the soul could not travel to the afterlife. It was a punishment designed to kill twice, once in the flesh and once in eternity. Some punishments also involved forced labor until death. Egypt's monuments were built on the backs of countless workers, and criminals often became slaves in the harshest conditions. Imagine being forced to haul massive stones in the desert heat, whipped when you faltered, starved when you slowed, and knowing there was no release except death. For some, this slow destruction was worse than execution. Their bodies became tools until they broke, discarded when no longer useful. These methods remind us that Egyptian punishments were about more than crime and justice. They were about power, fear, and control. By shaping punishments around the deepest fears of their people, pain, shame, and eternal damnation, the rulers ensured obedience. Every act of cruelty was a message carved into the minds of the living. The gods are watching, and mercy is rare. This system kept Egypt stable for centuries, but it left behind a shadow that is often hidden beneath the golden glow of its monuments. One of the darkest aspects of Egyptian punishment was how it turned suffering into a public show. These were not hidden executions carried out in private. They were staged events, designed to teach lessons. Villages would gather to watch, and children would stand alongside their parents, their wide eyes fixed on the cruelty. The message drilled into their minds was simple: obey or suffer the same fate. Fear was not just a tool of justice, it was a tradition passed down through generations. Take the example of impalement once more. It was not enough to simply kill a traitor. The spectacle of watching their slow death turned it into a community ritual. Mothers and fathers would point to the victim and whisper to their children, "This is what happens when you betray Egypt." It was brutal education. Even the innocent learned that the pharaoh's power was beyond question. Another punishment that carried theatrical weight was flaying, the peeling away of skin from the body. Though less common, it is mentioned in some accounts as a punishment for serious crimes against the state. The victim's skin was sometimes hung on walls as a warning. Imagine walking past the city gates and seeing not only guards, but also the preserved skin of someone who once lived there. It was terror frozen in place, a permanent reminder that the law could strip more than life. It could strip identity itself. Whipping was also a common punishment, but unlike the quick lashes one might imagine, Egyptian whippings were long, deliberate, and relentless. Victims were tied down, and the lash carved into their flesh again and again. Sometimes this was done to extract confessions, other times as punishment itself. The pain broke the body, but the humiliation broke the spirit. To be whipped in front of your community meant you were marked as weak and dishonorable. The scars that remained told your story long after the event was over. Exile was another form of punishment, though less bloody. It was no less cruel. To be cast out from the community in ancient Egypt was almost the same as a death sentence. Life depended on belonging to a group, sharing resources, and worshipping together. An exile lost protection, family, and the chance of being buried properly. They wandered, unwanted and unremembered, cut off from the afterlife as surely as if their body had been burned. When we put these punishments together, a pattern emerges. They were not only about the body, but about destroying every layer of a person's existence, physical, social, and spiritual. The Egyptians believed fear kept balance, and they wielded it without hesitation. That is why so much of their justice seems extreme to us today. It was not enough for someone to die. They had to die in a way that left everyone else too afraid to ever repeat their crime. That was the true heart of Egyptian cruelty. It was systematic, ritualized, and designed to last far longer than the screams of the condemned. Among the most chilling punishments was one reserved for blasphemy, insulting the gods themselves. The Egyptians lived in constant awe and fear of their deities. Every temple, every ritual, every offering was proof of their devotion. To speak against the gods or to defile sacred ground was unthinkable. And when it happened, the punishment was designed to show that no one could escape divine wrath. Sometimes offenders were buried alive, a punishment that forced them to face death slowly, trapped beneath the very earth they had dishonored. Imagine the horror of hearing the last shovelful of sand fall above you, knowing that you would never see the light again. In other cases, blasphemers were sacrificed in ways that echoed religious rituals. Priests might preside over their death, turning it into a grim offering. For the people watching, it was not only punishment, but also purification. The crowd believed that by spilling the blasphemer's blood, they restored harmony between gods and men. In this way, justice and religion became one, and cruelty was masked as devotion. Treason was another crime that drew the harshest punishments. To plot against the pharaoh was to plot against the gods. Accounts describe conspirators who were forced to take their own lives, given poison as a mercy compared to public torture. Others were executed with no such mercy. They might be torn apart by wild animals in an arena or displayed on the city walls. The message was absolute. Loyalty was survival, betrayal was annihilation. Even lesser crimes carried punishments that today feel unbearable. For debt, people could be forced to sell themselves or their family members into slavery. Imagine a father standing before the officials, unable to pay what he owed and being forced to surrender his children as property. Their futures were stolen, their lives reduced to labor. The punishment did not end with the guilty. It swallowed their families whole. Poverty itself became a crime, punished as harshly as theft or lies. Women, too, faced particular cruelties. Adultery could result in mutilation or execution, depending on status. For some, noses and ears were cut off, marking them as unfaithful forever. In harsher cases, they were drowned or burned. These punishments were not only about morality, they were about control. Women were tied to family honor, and their suffering served as a warning to others. Their bodies became instruments of social order, punished to preserve the reputation of men in the state. Through all of this, the idea of fear never left the stage. Punishments were not random acts of cruelty. They were deliberate, crafted to strike terror in every witness. The Egyptians believed order had to be maintained at any cost, and cruelty was the price they were willing to pay. What shocks us today was to them the fabric of justice. And as we peel back these layers of history, we see not just the glory of temples and pyramids, but the shadow of blood and fire that kept them standing. By now, it is clear that Egyptian punishments were never about fairness. They were about power. But to truly understand their horror, we have to look at how punishment was used as a tool of control across every level of society. It was not just criminals or traitors who suffered. Ordinary people lived under the constant reminder that one wrong step could end everything. Fear was woven into daily life as tightly as the Nile flowed through their land. Think of the marketplaces. Traders who cheated customers risked not only fines, but mutilation. A dishonest merchant might find his hands cut off, leaving him unable to trade ever again. His store would remain empty, a silent warning to all who passed. In the fields, farmers who withheld grain from the state could be whipped or even executed for defying the demands of the pharaoh's officials. The smallest act of resistance was treated as rebellion, and rebellion was treated as blasphemy. Even within families, punishments cast long shadows. Children grew up witnessing public executions, learning early that obedience was survival. Mothers warned sons and daughters not only about natural dangers like crocodiles or sandstorms, but about the punishments of the law. Stories of impalement, flaying, and mutilation became bedtime warnings, keeping the young in line. Fear was not only in the courts or the temples, it lived in every home. For those in the military, discipline was especially severe. Soldiers who disobeyed orders could be whipped, branded, or executed. Cowardice in battle was seen as treason against Egypt itself. Imagine standing in the ranks, the clash of bronze echoing across the desert, knowing that running away meant not only dishonor, but death at the hands of your own people. The punishment for fear was more fear. The army was held together not just by loyalty, but by the terror of what awaited deserters. Slaves and servants suffered even worse. They had almost no rights, and their punishments were often cruel beyond measure. A disobedient slave could be beaten to death with no consequence for the master. Others were branded or scarred to mark their servitude forever. For them, Egypt was not a land of glory or beauty. It was a land of endless fear, where cruelty was daily life. But perhaps the greatest cruelty of all was how punishment denied people dignity in death. The Egyptians believed the afterlife was the true reward, the eternal journey that followed earthly struggles. To be denied proper burial was the harshest punishment imaginable. Bodies left unburied, burned, or mutilated were thought to doom the soul forever. Every act of cruelty was magnified by this belief. Pain did not end with death. It continued in eternity. And this, above all, made punishment in Egypt uniquely terrifying. The climax of Egyptian justice is this realization. Cruelty was not an accident, nor was it rare. It was systematic, deliberate, and woven into the very structure of society. The monuments that inspire awe today were built on a foundation of fear. The same hands that carved statues of gods also cut off the hands of thieves. Beauty and brutality lived side by side, each giving power to the other. As we reach the end of this journey into ancient Egypt's punishments, the picture is complete. What we see is not only a land of wonders, but also a land of fear. The pyramids, the temples, the golden masks, all of them dazzled the eye. Yet beneath that shine lay a society built on terror. Every punishment, every act of cruelty was a reminder that power flowed only one way, from the throne to the people, never the other way around. It is easy to wonder why such a great civilization, known for its art, its writing, and its scientific advances, would rely so heavily on cruelty. The answer lies in the balance they believed held the universe together. Ma'at, truth, justice, and cosmic order, was the force that kept chaos away. To the Egyptians, a crime was more than just a crime. It was a crack in the fabric of the universe. To repair it, the punishment had to be extreme. The harsher the crime, the harsher the answer. What seems to us as brutality was, to them, the restoration of balance. But there is another reason this cruelty has often been ignored in modern stories. We prefer to remember ancient Egypt as the cradle of beauty and wonder. We are taught about the pyramids, the pharaohs, and the gods, but not about the screams of the punished. Museums display golden artifacts, but rarely the instruments of torture. History remembers what is beautiful and forgets what is ugly. Yet both are true, and both are part of Egypt's legacy. The punishments also force us to ask deeper questions about human nature. Why do societies so often build order on fear? Why do rulers turn cruelty into spectacle? These are not questions trapped in the past. Even today, around the world, we see echoes of the same idea, that punishment can be used to control, to silence, to terrify. Ancient Egypt is long gone, but the shadow of its cruelty still stretches across time, reminding us of the dangers when power is absolute. In the end, the horrific truth about Egyptian punishments is not just that they were cruel. It is that they were effective. They kept millions obedient, they kept the state stable, and they made sure that no one forgot the might of the pharaoh. Cruelty became law, and law became divine. That is why Egypt endured for thousands of years. Not just because of its pyramids or armies, but because of the fear carved into the hearts of its people. And now that you know this darker side of Egypt, the question is, how does it change the way you see this ancient world? The next time you look at a pyramid or a statue of a pharaoh, will you also hear the echoes of those who screamed beneath their rule? History is not only about glory, it is also about pain. And by remembering both, we see the past for what it truly was. If this story shocked you, share your thoughts in the comments. Which punishment struck you as the most disturbing? Let's talk about it. And if you want to uncover more suppressed truths of history, stories the textbooks never told, make sure to subscribe. This is only the beginning. There are countless secrets still hidden in the shadows of time, waiting to be revealed.